Hello, welcome to Criterion's webinar on multi-state payroll. If you're not familiar with Criterion, Criterion is a human capital management software company. We are the publisher of a leading HCM solution for midsize and enterprise organizations in North America and globally in Europe and UK. We are going to be talking about multi-state payroll today. And joining me is Baskaran Ambalavanan with Hila Solutions. So before we get into the webinar, Baskaran, if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background, love to hear it.
Sure, Steve. Hey, Steve. Hey, everybody. My name is Baskaran Ambalavanan. I'm the principal for Hila Solutions. Hila Solutions is an HR technology advisory firm based in Irvine, California. We help small and mid-sized enterprise in three things: in system selection, implementation, integration, and maintenance. That's what we do at Hila Solutions. I'm glad to be here, Steve.
Well, thank you so much. Before we get into the presentation, I want to remind everybody that we have a chat room open, as well as you can ask questions and answers. And we reserve some time at the end of our presentation for us to go ahead and answer those questions as best we can. I have to say Baskaran is probably better suited to answering those questions. He has quite the extensive background in HCM solutions. So looking forward to hearing what you have to ask him and put him on the spot. So we're going to take some time today and we're going to help you master the art of multi-state compliance in a hybrid workforce. In the last 3 years, we've had, I guess, the opportunity to expand people's working environments from in-office to in-home, or to come up with something hybrid. And people now have the opportunity, or companies have the opportunity, to go out and find the best candidates, not just the best local candidates, which really opens companies up to finding the best of breed, if you will, in people as well as in solutions. So recent poll has come up with this, and it's very interesting that almost 60% of payroll professionals find that this is a challenging thing around remote working. And as we get into our presentation a little bit more in depth, we're going to go through some of probably the three major points to mastering this hybrid compliance issue. And then we're going to work through some examples that Baskaran has come across in his practice that kind of highlights the challenges that people have in that regard. And so one of the main issues or challenges that people have is obviously calculating income tax correctly. This is just really obviously important, not only to you as your organization, your employees, but also those federal, state, and local entities who are looking for their share of the system, of their revenue piece. So I think Baskaran, if we'll start off here, and we're going to talk about those three major points that people need to identify, starting with determining your economic nexus. So if you want to just give us some details around that to help people out.
Sure, Steve. I think as we see employees increasingly work remote locations, not necessarily the work location they used to. They can be working their vacation home or different states. So understanding is the economic nexus, right? So the connection, there are different states as requirement. Even if they have one employee working in a different state where the company is not registered, you want to make sure it's registered. And so that creates a nexus, right? If the employee is working there, I think that's determining what it impacts and how it impacts, right? There are certain states like called the temporary presence, right? Different states have different requirement. My employees, some states say 14 days if an employee works in my states, and then there is some, then it triggers, and some states say 30 days. For example, Utah has 20 days requirement, or take the case of Maine, like 23 days, and if they are making like $3,000, then the Nexus kicks in. So there are a lot of requirements. Each state varies. So understanding where the employee is working and understanding the requirement is important here, Steve.
Yeah, that's a big difference between, living and working in a state. I've spent some time in the DC area, and of course, that's a big challenge for folks there because of its proximity to the two states and the district. But we also do a lot of work with construction companies. In construction companies, you have the opportunity, wherever they're licensed, they obviously can work.
Sure.
And bringing somebody in from out of state to work a particular project for a period of time, and then of course moving on to another state later on creates a challenge, not only for the employee themselves, but also for the payroll masters, who are really trying to make sure that they're accurately counting not only the income tax that's required, but also things like unemployment taxes as well. And then you go into certain states like Ohio or Pennsylvania or Kentucky that even got local and school district taxes, and to be able to fine tune it, your tax calculations and your withholdings down to those local jurisdictions is really a test of the payroll people. We've got a lot of ways that we work with that to help people do this correctly and accurately and quickly within our solution. But determining the economic nexus is basically where you're working for a specific period of time. Is that fair?
Yeah. And also looking at the reciprocal agreement, I think you slightly touched on it. Understanding, yeah.
If we go to that next one, it's a reciprocal agreements, right? That's right. Another thing that pops up. Please explain a little bit more about that.
Well, so if you're working in two states, right? So the employee is working in two states. The question then becomes, so where do you do the withholding, where the taxes? I'm a resident of California, but I'm working in Colorado, how that works. And so if they have the states, many of the states have the reciprocal agreement where the taxes is factored into one particular state, or they have shared. I think that's what the reciprocal agreement is. Not all states have reciprocal agreements. So I think that's where it becomes critical, understanding which states have, and making sure your tax person who is handling the taxes or payroll are proficient in doing that. Understanding the reciprocal agreement states and versus where the employees are working.
Absolutely. And I pulled up that example of spending time in the DC area, where I could be a resident of Virginia, and I spend my time, in Maryland, or, working in Maryland, a good portion of that time. How does that reciprocity work, between those states? And actually, ideally, having your payroll system take care of that for you, because that's even better. Right, it's that having that payroll system that understands that reciprocity already, that the payroll person doesn't have to worry about that.
Yeah, there are also forms requirement, right? If the employee works where the employee works versus where the employee leaves, and then that case which form they need to fill, that varies from different state to state. I think that's where it's important to understand where the employee is working and whether they have the agreement in place between the states.
All right. All right, well, thanks. Hey, the other piece then, is, we determine the nexus, right? And then also we have to factor in this reciprocal agreements that may or may not exist between, tax jurisdictions. But then we have, the locals, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think that is also critical, right? I think each state, California is a country by itself when it comes to employment laws and taxation, right? Each local cities have different tax structure. So it's not one all be all, one and done. So understanding what the differences between the states, I mean, the local cities they work and the tax structure is also important. Most of the payroll systems can do it, but again, understanding what it is, because the system may not know where the employee is working, HR does know, right? I think that's where it comes critical.
Absolutely. Making all those distinctions or nuances all around payroll taxes, by the nexus, by the reciprocal agreements, and then by the local, requirements. So, the other thing that, we want to take a look at too is, just some, multi-state compliance in action. And I know you have several clients that you've consulted with on these types of things. And, and so we're going to bring up a few of them, but, one of the biggest things is just being aware of compliance, right? I don't know if you can speak a little bit about that before we go into a couple case studies. That might be a good way to, how is it, what's the best way, what are some tools and thoughts behind compliance awareness?
Well, I think that compliance can start as simple as like daily overtime, right? How do you calculate the overtime, right? I think in states like California, you have daily overtime, 8 hours or pay overtime, 12 hours. And then other states like Washington, other states, they say if you exceed 40 hours, then you're okay. So understanding starts with a simple thing as an overtime, right? That's where the complaint starts. All you need is one disgruntled employee to kick the ball rolling. So understanding that part. And then the tax withholding pay frequency, certain states require different pay frequency, and then the methods, right? And then how do you pay the sick leave? How do you pay the meal penalty premium, right? I think most of for example, in California, if you're paying the meal premium, some employee missed that meal premium and then they pay it, you have to pay the regular payout rate. I mean, understanding all these things, right? Each state is applicable, which state triggers these kinds of things. Looking at then the tax holding, and above all, understanding the employees, whether you have the policy in place, whether the employee working in hybrid one, the employee understand the schedule, the expectations, all these things matters. Of course, in remote work, I mean, I tell my clients, don't focus on start time and end time, focus on the output, focus on the productivity. So, instead of somebody is sitting on a shoulder, be like a partner, patting the shoulder, right? I think that is the approach I tell my clients. So I think all these things taking into consideration tax, compliance, sick leave, pay leave, and then how the workers' compensation works, right? Most of the workers' compensation, almost all of them, starts with the place of work, regardless of where the employee is in the system. So all these things, right? It starts from the pay, withholding, compliance, workers' compensation, leave, and all those things.
So we got overtime, we've got workers' comp, we've got unemployment. Of course, we've got, all these are tied into, the pay calculation, and of course, making sure we get the right taxes. And you've got some scenarios that we're going to walk through, or some case studies. And I'm really looking forward to this because I, obviously read through them prior, and I'm intrigued by some of them. So I'm going to put one up here first, and if you can walk through this with us and talk a little bit more about, this example that you presented.
Sure. I my client, for privacy reason, I didn't name the company name, Steve. So one of my client,
Sure.
Energy company, they have about 550 50-ish employees. They operate mostly in California. And the challenge is during the COVID, until then, most of the employees worked in California. And then came COVID, people, they had the remote work policy. And one of the employees moved to North Dakota, right? I think that's where he's coming from. So moved to that location. Then the question then became, it's a small HR team they have. And so the challenge was, how do we handle the overtime, double time, and the workers' compensation provision? So that we looked at it, and then the company is not registered in North Dakota, first of all, because the company, as I said, they operate primarily in California. So always you want to start with the register with the Secretary of State. Even if there's one employee, you want to make sure that, register the company to establish the Nexus, complete the tax registration, income tax holding, register for state license and income tax holding for employees, uptime, unemployment insurance, and workers' compensation. So these are the solutions we suggested for the employee. I mean, you may think, why one employee should we do it? But it's a requirement, right? I think you want to keep the employee happy. At the same time, ensure the work is getting done. Same time, as an employer, you have an obligation to meet all those obligations as well.
So then it goes to some of the differences or the nuances between the states, right? Because we've established that nexus. Now let's talk about the compliance.
Sure. So if you're a California employer, Steve, I think you know this better than anybody else. You are better to face challenges in any other states, right? I think California is a different. It's a country by itself when it comes to employment laws. So they have daily overtime, and North Dakota does not have the daily overtime. It's a good news. So anything overtime, work more than over 40 hours a week. So all we need to do is modify the employee work state. And they also have a provision for mandatory 30 minutes off-duty meal period for non-exempt employees with no rest period. In California, you need to give 30 minutes rest period. It's required. These are the minimum understanding. So educating the employee on the off-duty meal period. And in California, they used to have mandated this a few years ago, it is removed, but most of the employers still follow the meal premium methodology. So I think here, again, educating the employee as well, right? I think the requirement is the employees used to work in a different way here versus working in North Dakota. And then the workers' compensation, right? North Dakota state like Washington, they're all considered as a monopolistic states for workers' compensation, which means you cannot have your own insurance. You have to work with the government, with the state government. So they are not the Dakota. They have the workplace safety and insurance. Is a sole provider and administrator of workers' compensation. So we have to do it, register with them. So these are the things we handled when it came to overtime, double time, workers' compensation.
Okay. So there's different rules around overtime and so forth. And if we go to this next scenario, then we're talking about tax compliance, because it's a little bit different. We were talking about how the variations around overtime and workers' comp worked in the California versus North Dakota as the example, but there's also going to be that true, in other states, that overtime. So now here's more around tax, right? This one is more around the tax implications.
Correct. Yeah, I think again, as I mentioned, this one is another client of mine. So it's a health insurance provider. They have 350, 60 employees. They operate in California and Nevada. This employee wanted to move to California from California to Vegas. So middle of the year. Okay, so the question then becomes, moving late in the year, should they pay part-year state tax returns, right? It's a normal thing if we go to other states, but with Nevada, they don't have the state income tax. So only they have to worry about the California part, source income for the part period. So that solved a big headache for the payroll. And then we recommended the employee to assert a Nevada residency as quickly as possible to cease California residency so that the tax portion is not impacted.
Oh, okay. So the whole idea was to get them a resident of Nevada as quickly as possible, so that they didn't have to have income tax.
Otherwise, that California may come back and then say, "Hey, so you are still a resident of California, right?" I think that's a idea behind recommending go quickly as possible. Make sure because Nevada doesn't have state tax return, right? They don't have state income tax, and so I think that's the idea behind it.
Got it. Okay. And so here's another one. This is kind of the reverse, I think, of what happened in the previous slide.
Sure.
So maybe you can give some, background to this as well.
Yeah, so the employee working in Washington warehouse, it's a logistic provider client, and they have about 700 plus employees. The employee moved to Clackamas, Oregon, the state of Oregon. So the point is, how do I handle taxes, right? Which state rule is applicable? So there are very few states where there is no state tax, like Florida, Texas, Washington, Nevada. So Washington state is one of them. They do not have personal income tax. Oregon does, but Oregon does not have a sales tax, right? So although he has moved to Oregon, his place of work is still Washington. He still works in that, it's like 40 miles. So so for all practical and legal purposes, all Washington rules apply with taxes, workers' compensation, etc.
Oh, okay. So it's really that, in this example, though, the reciprocity doesn't exist because it doesn't have income tax.
Right.
But, that would be in the states that do, that would be a further example of that, correct?
Exactly. So, and Washington is also a monopolistic state, Steve, again, like North Dakota. So you need to buy the insurance, workers' compensation insurance through Washington State Department of Labor. So.
Oh, okay. All right. And we've got this other example of really moving, to another state, but this impacts some other things as well, not just, well, in this example, there's not state income tax between either state,
right,
but really more around benefits and workers' comp, right?
Right. So we looked at different examples, right? The income tax, how do you pay the overtime, double time? How do you handle the workers' compensation? This case is slightly different. This employee is working in Austin, and then when COVID came again after 1 year, decided to move to Florida. So, and this position is a fantastic employee. The question then becomes how the Texas health benefits work and the workers' compensation work in Florida, right? I think most of the health plans, Steve, you know this, and so they have the preferred in-network as provided located in particular state. And the emergency cases, almost all the plans covers, but in regular plans, you want to go with your in-network. So, there are some options you have, like you can explore multi-state plans option with your broker, but we explored that option, but it was prohibitively expensive. So we have to educate the employee, hey, you're fine in you moving there, working there, but these are the things you need to be aware of and educated fully, and the employee acknowledged it. As far as the workers' compensation is concerned, because place of work almost always applies, so the Florida, it'll be covered under the Florida workers' compensation. So that is a pretty straight deal. But when it comes to the medical insurance, I think that's where the issue became. So that's a solution we had to finally give them.
Okay, so there's other factors, not just with taxes, that people have to consider when that, an employee moves to a different state, things like the benefits. Are they covered? Are they not covered? And do they need to have that conversation as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, as we know, I mean, healthcare is one of the critical component of our life cycle, life today, and so that conversation is absolutely critical. You can accommodate as much as possible, but where it is expensive, prohibitively expensive, and this employer covers almost 90% of the premium. So I think this all the things in consideration. So finally, you have to say, hey, that's all we can do, and this is the prohibitive cost. And so you're taking this particular risk or option.
Interesting. Didn't think about that aspect. Great, I appreciate that. And so now we can take some time and Michael, if you want to give us some insight to what people are asking.
So we have one question from Lena. She asked, how do we handle employees who, I guess this is temporary 3 months work from Europe. So people that are working 3 months from Europe.
So this is more around an international employee.
Yeah.
Are they working in Europe or are they living in the US?
I think the question, if I understand, Steve, I think the employee works from Europe for 3 months. Oh, okay. She says employee lives in Boston. Okay. So I'm not sure I understand the question. Employees lives in Boston. So what is the 3 months question? Lena, can you expand the question a little more? Because if the employee is living and working in Boston, so where is the question of 3 months Europe comes in play? Okay, so if the employee, I'm assuming from your question, Lena, I'm assuming the employee working these 3 months in France, right? I think you keep in mind they have the GDPR laws where the data, employee data is stored and how you process it, how you store it and all the things. So I think that is a prime consideration. I have to do some research in terms of how the taxes work for that 3 months. If you're an employee, if you're an American citizen working abroad, there are limitations up to, I think it is last time with $80,000 up to you're not taxed, but that is applicable more to employees working permanently abroad, right? I'm not sure about this 3 month regulation, so I need to do a little more research on that. I can get back to you, Lena. Yeah, so American citizens usually when they go as an expat, they have certain leewage in terms of how much they can earn. I think it is 80,000 or 82,000 up to they don't have to pay taxes. After that, they have to pay the taxes. But this being a 3 months case, so I need to do some research, a little more research on that. I'll get back to you, Lena.
All right. Michael, what else is on the list?
We have a question from Abby asking, would you have to get another workers' comp coverage for each state where you have employees working remotely?
Well, I think the place of work determines the workers' compensation, right? So if employee is working in any other state, even if it is one employee, then you register there and then that particular state's worker compensation is going to apply, right? The example I mentioned in North Dakota, the employee is the only employee that operating in North Dakota, which means they have to register with the state and they have to buy that local insurance. So if they are working in that state, the workers' compensation should apply.
So it sounds like Baskaran is that any state you have employees, you need to have their follow their workers' comp.
Yeah, that particular state's worker comp is applicable where the place of work. That's where it kicks in.
Okay.
All right, so next question is coming from Joseph. How should we think about digital nomad employees who don't have a permanent address?
Yeah, I think the digital nomad employees, meaning they go like France, like Lena mentioned, or how that different countries, like going to Caribbean countries. So what's the question, Joseph? Can you expand the question a little more?
I have an interesting thing. I think I can relate to this in that I have one of my son's friends sets up his office in Florida for a few months, and then he sets up, and then he goes like, "Ah, I'm done here. Now I've moved to Texas. Now, work for a few months, still working for the same company." But I think that was the implication of being a nomad employee.
Yeah, I think most of that, and I think what I would suggest is, I mean, they have most of the communication, they have the direct deposit, they get to the bank, it goes to the bank. So there is no challenge in terms of distributing the salaries or anything. In terms of communication, they have phones and emails. But for the having the purpose of addresses, they do need some local address, right? Their driving license, and so they do need some address, whether it is in mailbox, post box. I mean, post office box. I mean, there are different requirements. I mean, if you're working different state and driving car there, you definitely need to update the residency requirements. Also kicks in, right? So the easy solution would be to have post office, some form of contact address.
And that would establish their nexus, if you will.
Yeah, so I think for them, right? I think the employee, obviously they are nomad, but they are staying somewhere, right? I think that address is required for the purposes. Does it answer your question, Jose?
Michael?
All right, so nothing else in the queue right now, but just wanted to invite everyone, if you do have any questions, we have some time, so feel free to drop them in the chat. Oh, we do have one. Is there a reference book or website available for all the states instead of having a look through each state's website? And that comes from Laura.
Laura, is that question are you asking about a reciprocal agreement between the different states? If that is a question, I have a checklist cheat sheet I can share with you at which state your employee works and what state the reciprocal agreement is and what type of form they should do. I think if the question is related to reciprocal agreement, I have the cheat sheet I can share with all of you, with you. But if the question is related to workers' comp, generally the place of working is applicable for the workers' comp. So if you can expand the question specifically, if you are looking for specific areas, yeah. Okay, sure. Noted, Abby. I will send that sheet to you.
All right, does anyone else have anything before we go?
Well, Laura's question is, new employee in Maryland. Some states respond pretty quick. I registered an employee with Colorado for one of my clients recently. They are pretty responsive. They're really super fast. Each state works differently, so you may have to wait a little more, Laura. Any other questions?
All right, we'll give it another second. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Again, this was about multi-state payroll, and we have one more screen to share here. Here's contact information. If you want to get a hold of Baskaran, there's his email address below. Certainly, if you want to get in touch with me, mine is there below. Or if you'd like more information about Criterion, it is at info@criterionhcm.com, and we'll get you what you need.
Also, Steve, Yeah, I also, Steve, I think Michael has shared both of our LinkedIn profile on the chat area.
Oh, super. So yeah, please feel free to reach out there. And as another note, Baskaran is starting up some podcasts, and we'll be doing some interviews on software, HR software. I want to make that specific. So look for that as well,
Thank you.
upcoming.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. So that podcast is going to focus on digital HR, workforce technology, challenges, opportunities, and what the tools can do. It's going to be related to the HR tech specifically and the work of now.
Excellent. This has been recorded, so you'll be able to receive a link to this if you want to go back and listen to it and share it with your friends. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Steve Kuhn with Criterion, along with Baskaran at Hila Solutions.
Hey,
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody. This is Baskaran, Ambalavanan. Thanks, Steve.